Guys, it's Samantha, and today I am back with two book reviews for you guys. Today I'm going to be reviewing both The Midnight Queen by Sylvia Isou Hunter and The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. First one up is going to be The Midnight Queen. The Midnight Queen is an alternate historical fantasy book. It takes place in our world, but obviously events have been altered, historical events have been altered, and so it takes place in our world, but it is incredibly different from our world as well. And in this world there's also magic, and the story follows Gray, who is a student of Merlin College, Oxford. And Merlin College is the oldest school of magic in England, and young Gray is a student of Professor Calendar. Once he reaches certain levels, students become under the tutorship of one of the professors. He is under the tutorship of Professor Calendar, who he doesn't really get along with, or his fellow peers who are being tutored by the same professor. But one night his peers ask him to accompany them on an errand for the professor. He reluctantly agrees, but only after a couple of his own friends agree to come along as well. But events transpire and the students are set upon by some very angry townspeople, and Gray returns back to the college to get help. But he has overextended his magic and he collapses. When he wakes up, he discovers that things have occurred that he is being blamed for, that he doesn't remember doing, and he knows he hasn't done. And the professor ends up taking him away to his house in the country for the summer he claims to take him away from the trouble and to give him a new start. So he feels that things are going on, things are not quite what they seem. He doesn't trust this professor, and his magical abilities seem to be dampened, which he is attributing to overextending himself. And soon he meets the professor's three daughters, of which the middle one, Sophie, he ends up striking up a relationship with. But Sophie isn't all that she seems either, and together they set out to kind of discover what exactly the professor is plotting and how it might affect the entire kingdom of Britain. This was a really interesting book. I had high hopes for this book because the plotline sounded intriguing, as well as the fact that one of my favorite authors, Juliette Marillier, has a little blurb on the back praising this book, so I was really excited to read it. Overall, the story wasn't bad. It was definitely an intriguing plotline. I enjoyed it taking place in our world, though sort of like a parallel world type of a thing, where it's our world, but it's a lot different. I definitely felt this suffers from first novel syndrome. Their language that she was using was really interesting. It was because the story takes place in what we would consider Regency England, so the time in which Jane Austen lived. So I feel that she was trying to sort of emulate that language that was used to write back then, because the language that she was using to write wasn't your typical modern fantasy language. It was some of the words and the way in which she was using them. It was definitely reading in the same way that you would read a classic book to me. I felt that in times it became extremely convoluted. I had a hard time following certain events. It was becoming confusing. It would seem like their characters were ready to set out and do something, but then they would do something else, and so then I'd be confused as to whether or not I actually missed something, or if she just didn't describe the situation very well. I also felt a lot of this was very repetitive. It was sort of the same thing happening over and over and over again, which I found really annoying. I think that this book could have been about 200 pages less, and it would have been a lot better. I also felt that the two main characters, Gray and Sophie, felt a bit flat for me. I felt that some of the surrounding characters, the supporting characters, actually had more depth and interest to them for me than the two main characters. I liked it well enough that I would be willing to continue on with this series and to read another book by her, because sometimes when authors come out with subsequent books and novels, they tend to be a little bit better than their first. So I liked it well enough to sort of check out some of her other works when they become available. But definitely this book, it didn't really quite match my hopes for it. It was intriguing, but it didn't quite live up to my expectations. I also would really wish that she would have explored the history of the world a little bit more. I was a little bit confused as to what events had been altered that made this world so different from ours. For instance, the people in this book, they actually worshipped all of the old gods, not just Celtic gods, but also Roman and Greek gods, but there was no explanation as to why and what happened with Christianity, etc. Obviously, certain countries were built still along the same lines. For instance, Ireland was referred to by its old Gaelic name of Eire. I think Eire. I can never remember how to say that in Gaelic, but E-I-R-E. Instead of Ireland, and they were their own kingdom. as in England didn't own any part of it, things like that. So, but it wasn't really explored or explained in any way, so I wish that she would have explored some of the historical events a little bit more. Overall, I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. I liked this story enough. The execution was lacking a little bit, but I'm intrigued enough to continue on with this author. The next book that I'll be reviewing is The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. Fitz is a bastard child. His father was the prince king in waiting of chivalry, but his father never knew that he had a son, and at the age of 6, his grandfather, his mother's father, drops him off at the castle gates and informs him that he will no longer be taking care of the boy and that they will need to take charge of him, and his father will have to claim him. So Fitz is taken into the castle, but he isn't introduced to his father, but he is taken into the castle, and he's not really accepted because of his role in the family as a bastard child, so he's not really recognized. He's also put under the guardianship of what would be, I think, chivalry's right-hand man, his friend, really, who also is the head stable master, Burrich. He's put under his care. Burrich is very strict and not exactly kindly, but you can tell it's mostly because he's used to being around animals and he is little children. And that definitely shows some of his own inexperience. So Fitz grows up in this environment where he is not totally accepted by his father's family or really anybody else in the castle. Things are whispered about him. But when he is about 8, 9 years old, he comes into encounter with the king, and the king decides to give him an education. And among that education is to train him to be the new assassin to him and to just sort of be devoted to the crown. So Fitz begins to learn not only swordcraft and his letters, but he also learns to become an assassin. Fitz sort of becomes involved in castle politics. Pretty soon on in the book, you learn that Fitz is actually imbued with 2 of the magical systems in this book, one being the skill, which is sort of like a psychic type of magic ability in which you can influence the things around you using a type of psychic ability, I guess the best way to describe it, as well as sort of wild magic that gives him the ability to communicate with animals, but his guardian Birch frowns upon this and tells him that he needs to squash it at all costs because it is a bad thing to have. Soon it becomes apparent to the royal family that he has this ability and this skill, and they have him set out to be trained in it, as well as to train to become an assassin. So Fitz is just sort of thrust into this world, this court politics, family politics, and he is sort of set out to find his own way find his own place amongst all of these things. I think this book was definitely setting up a lot for the series to come, because I believe this is the first in the trilogy, and then there's another trilogy, but I believe all these trilogies take place within the same world, the same characters, I believe. So it's definitely a setup novel, but I absolutely enjoyed it. Robin Hobb's writing is beautiful. There's something about fantasy books written in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s that, to me, read a lot differently than fantasy books do now. So this was really, really great to come back to, because I read a lot of those books in middle school and high school. So this was definitely a bit of a nostalgic book for me because it held that language and that magic for me that those books did. And there's just something about the writing style and the way the stories are told from books written in that time period that I absolutely love. So I absolutely love this book. Robin Hobb's writing is beautiful. I think it might be a little bit dense for some people, but I really enjoyed it, and it's really not that bad once you get past the first couple of chapters. The characters in this book I absolutely love. They're definitely fully fleshed out, and they have a lot of depth to them. Fitz and Burrich and Shade and the Fool and just all of these characters I absolutely love, and I'm intrigued to learn so much more about them. The story itself was so good. It completely captured my attention from start to finish. I couldn't wait to find out what was going to happen next with Fitz and all of the other characters and what everything means, and this book did not disappoint. It was definitely one of my favorites from the 2014. I absolutely loved it, and if you love fantasy, I highly recommend you check out this book. This definitely should be a staple on any fantasy lover's list of books to read. This is just such a good book, and I rated it 5 out of 5 stars. I just love this book so much. It was so good. This is the way that she weaves the plot lines together, and you see Fitz grow from a young child to mid-teens, I think. I cannot wait for book 2. I cannot wait to move on with the series, which I will be doing this month. I am just so excited. This book was everything I was looking for in a fantasy book, and I couldn't ask for anything more. It was just, I loved it, guys. I loved it so much. Alright guys, those were my reviews of Midnight Queen by Sylvia Zoe Hunter and The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found these to be helpful. Let me know down in the comments if you read either of these books and what your thoughts were. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, happy reading. Bye!